right now we have all the speakers and the panelists. We still have 5 minutes. So I'll check all the people. The Dennis Tenen, the speaker, and the Alex Gill, the speaker, and the Joe Bradley, the panelist, Alex Taekwang Lee, the panelist, and Kim Hee-jin Kim, the panelist, and then I don't see. She was there. Jamie Jungmin Yu, the panelist. So everybody is here for the speakers and panelists. So we are all set. We are waiting for the other audience. At the same time, we have the YouTube streaming at the moment.
So, Youngmin, I wanted to apologize before we get started because my house is about to get busy. People will start waking up. I put myself in the dining room, very far from the activity, but they will be walking around there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
My mother, my son, my wife, everybody.
Yeah. That'll be okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. We're trying to use the living room, but I'm actually there's some disturbance as well. So I just instead I'm using my own on the study room. Yeah, very small room.
Yeah, I almost went to my office at the university, but it's too cold outside right now.
Yeah. How far is it from the office to your home? Is it the
10
walking
minutes.
distance? 10 minutes by walking. Yeah.
No, by car.
By car, 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't move inside the city. I moved a little bit outside so I can have a nice house, city, so mostly apartments.
Yeah, New Haven is a very nice place. I love the city.
Nice place,
yeah.
Hopefully we will welcome you here at some point.
Sorry that we cannot compete in person. Maybe next time we can invite you to Korea so that we can have a nice gathering together. Okay. So people are coming in. I think we have almost 9 o'clock or 2 minutes. So 1 hour, we are 13 hours ahead. So right now you're 8 o'clock in the morning, but we are 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. So coffee.
Yeah,
coffee
we're
break.
still coffee. You guys already can drink beer.
Yeah, Professor Kim Ju-sung.
예.
예. 한지한 선생님도 오셨네요. 안녕하세요, 한지한 선생님. 예. 우리 So maybe it's almost 9 o'clock. 1 minute.
1 minute.
Be ready. I think once we start, maybe you begin the opening.
Yes, I'm going to start at 9 o'clock. 30 more seconds. Okay. Good evening, Korea, and good morning over there in the States. My name is Chu Sung. It's my great honor to be here today for this academic event. The theme of this event or program is Artificial Intelligence, avec Digital Humanities. And we have two keynote speakers and four discussants. This program is hosted by the Transmedia World Literature Institute and Digital Humanities Lab at Dongguk University. And this is also hosted by NRF, Korea-US Special Cooperation Project. This program is sponsored by Dongguk University, Dankook University, and English Language and Literature Association of Korea, Korean Association of Humanities, National Research Foundation of Korea. Okay, we have two keynote speakers. One is Alex Gill from Yale University and Dennis Tinan from Columbia University. Professor Youngmin, can you take over, please? Can you introduce their speakers?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for Professor Kim Ju-sung. Kim Ju-sung is co-PI, co-principal investigator of this Naturalist Foundation project. We've been doing the combining, the converging three different areas, like the digital humanities and world literature and transmedia. For the past 4 years, I have been doing this research and the project dealing with all the digital humanities and world literature together. So I think this is the final stage of the 2022, the project of the inviting. What about thinking about the artificial intelligence in terms of the digital humanities? This is the topic which we call the DH and avec, the AI. So maybe this is a very the hot topic nowadays throughout the world. So maybe in terms of the technology and literature, technology humanities, how do we understand the convergence of these two different areas, but at the same time, literature and then the technology is very much closely related without understanding the nature and the origin of the convergence. So nowadays, a lot of the philosophers, people are talking about difference between those two areas, literature, humanities, and technology. But at the same time, there's so much in common. And if you go deeper down into the nature of the language itself in terms of code, or maybe how do we use the tools and technology in terms of the understanding, dealing with all these codes of the literary discourses. So that is the beginning of our questions. So today's seminar or symposium is not simply listen to the lectures, but I mean, we need a Q&A, I mean, question and answer discussion about this matter from the audience as well. So I think that for 3 hours, we are going to deal with all this difficult subject, but at the same time, this is kind of a dialogue between the speakers who are the specialists. I think they are leading figure, I mean, the world-renowned figures in the field of AI and DH. If you Google around, maybe you notice that Alex Gill from the Yale University, who was before July, he was in Columbia University. I met him a long time ago in University of Virginia, and then at the time he was very much like the literary scholar, but suddenly he transformed himself into kind of the digital humanist. I mean, one of the leading figure in the world. So I think that's my first understanding of the Alex Gill as a literary theorist and literary person. But now I feel like he's quite different person, strange phenomenon. So I think that's my understanding. In 2018, I visited Columbia University, where he was the leading librarian at the Columbia University Library. And then I met the Dennis there. They're close together. I mean, Dennis is the professor of English literature at the Columbia University. And then the Alex Gill is a head librarian there. And then they are working very closely. And I learned a lot. What's the meaning of this, the collaboration between the librarian and then the Department of English? So actually, the Alex Gill was the member of Department of English, but actually now they're converging all this together, and I learned a lot from their meeting, their encountering. I think the avec is the meaning of the with together with. So that is the beginning of my understanding, investigating their works. And then this is a result of the inviting them. Maybe not only me, maybe we have to listen how they collaborate, how they talk about their own field in a very different way from our understanding. So that is the beginning. And then if you know the literature, most people here are attending this symposium, particularly English majors or maybe comparative literature, and also digital humanities. So I think we will start this conversation starting with 2 lectures. If you look at the chatting, you will find the program. So I think before starting, we have very important the VIP from the English literature part, who is president of the English Language and Literature Association Korea. I didn't want to ask him to give a congratulatory remark, something like that. But since he's here, so maybe I'll ask him briefly. Can you say hello to people, Professor Lee Jung-woo? President Lee Jung-woo? Is disappearing? No. Maybe later. Maybe he can talk. So he's now currently president of the English Language and Literature Association Korea, and also the Korean Digital Humanity Association. The president is Kim Hyun. Actually, he cannot be here, but I'm vice president of the KADH, so I'm representing Korean Digital Humanity Association as well. So I think before talking too much about the nature of this, maybe we better start with since we have only 7 minutes past, so maybe we can start with maybe Alex Gill, who is going to give us a very strange topic, but actually is very deeply intriguing topic for us. So let me introduce Alex Gill. So you have all the program. If you proceeding program, you can see the introduction of his biographical information. But I'll read it briefly and then talking more about him. Alex Gill, Gill Fuentes Alexandra is the original name. He is the senior lecturer and the associate research faculty of digital humanities in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Yale University, where he teaches introductory and advanced courses in digital humanities and runs project-based learning and collective research initiatives. So before joining Yale, and Alex served for 10 years as a digital scholarship librarian at Columbia University. There he co-created and nurtured the Butler Studio and the Group for Experimental Methods in the Humanity Research. I think this part is very important. I went there in 2018 and met Alex Gill in the library, and then noticed the nature of the collaboration among the humanities faculty with the digital humanities, particularly the liaison was Alex Gill. So a huge amount of the kind of collaboration I discovered there. So his research interests include Caribbean culture and history, and digital humanities and technology design for different infrastructural socio-economic environments, and the ownership and material extent of the cultural and scholarly record. Alex Gill is the current senior editor of the Archipelagos Journal, editor of Internationalization of Digital Humanities Scholarly, and the co-organizer of the Caribbean Digital Annual Conference, and then co-principal investigator of the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective, funded by Andrew Mellon Foundation. Over the past decade, he has been a prolific producer and contributing team member of many recognized digital humanities projects and scholarly software, including Torn Apart, Separados, In the Same Boat, and Wax. His scholarly articles have appeared in several essay collections and refereed journals around the world, including Genesis in France, in Canadian Review of Comparable Literature, and Revista des Investigaciones Literarias y Culturales, Venezuela. His forthcoming edition and translation of the Law's original version of A Messager, sorry for the French pronunciation, is forthcoming from Duke Press. There is much more to talk about Alex Gill, but I think this is basically the information. If you Google the Alex Gill, and you have tons of the kind of information about him. I would say that he's a leading figure in the digital humanities globally at the moment. So I want to ask Alex Gill to take over the microphone to start your keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Youngmin. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to participate this evening, this morning for me. I will speak, hopefully, slowly enough, which is strange for me. Dennis can be my witness that I speak very fast, but hopefully I can keep it slow. If I start speaking fast, please, somebody you slow me down. Now, I want to talk about a lot of things, but because I'm speaking slow, I have to try to synthesize as much as possible. My goal today is to first try to imagine with you in a speculative way what the total library of the world looks like in 2022. And then I want to suggest the ways in which artificial intelligence might produce a very different library of the world. I say might, maybe we will talk about this. And Dennis's talk will actually probably continue on those themes, with the idea that machines can read machine produced or machine stored media. Now, towards the end, I will leave an opening for us to talk about what libraries and researchers might be able to do to move the world in the directions that they want. And hopefully in the question and answer, we will actually get to talk a little bit more about the very specific things of having librarians and scholars work together that you mentioned, Youngmin. But for the most part of my talk, I want to keep us in a speculative mode, in a sort of imaginative, creative mode, with the most interesting possibilities in mind. Now, I asked students who are joining us today to read only 2 texts. They're not texts in digital humanities. I asked them to read Borges. I asked them to read 2 stories by Borges. One is The Library of Babel, and the other one is El Aleph. There were many other stories I could have chosen here that all show the way in which Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, tried to think of a language to describe the library of all things. Something very curious about Jorge Luis Borges, who is one of the most famous writers in the Spanish language in the 20th century, is that he was the director of the National Library of Buenos Aires for most of his career. He was, the National Library of Buenos Aires is the largest library in Argentina. And he was in charge of that whole collection. He wrote these stories as he was doing his administrative duties in the library. In the Library of Babel, we see the possibility of the library of all things that is generated infinitely across infinite rooms based on a very specific constraint, a limited number of pages, a limited number of characters, all combined in different ways to produce these hexagonal rooms that spread and spread and spread to infinity. That library is very different than the one presented in Ed Aleph. In Ed Aleph, we learn about a small spot underneath a staircase in which you could see all of reality at once. And this vision would overwhelm you. This vision, of course, has been passed down from mystic to mystic over the history of humanity in many different traditions. Borges also wrote other stories in which he described the possibility of this total library. One of my favorite ones, which I did not ask you to read, is called The Congress. In this story, a small group of people in Buenos Aires decide to form the Congress of the World. They will make laws for everybody in the world. One of the people in the group decided that they needed to have a library for the Congress of the World. So they sent their representatives to many different parts of the world to start collecting books. Eventually, somebody thought that we cannot only collect books, we also must collect dissertations. And the collection started growing until they ran out of money. And at the last day of the Congress of the World, the rich person that was financing the Congress burned all the books and asked everybody to walk outside into the streets of Buenos Aires to realize that the Congress of the World was the world itself. This other vision of reality asks you to experience the library of the world one thing at a time. And if you go back to Borges, you will find many other visions of what this library could be. Now, I want us to start there because I want to move in the direction of with you of trying to start to see what the actual library of the world is today. Surely it is a material thing. Whether it's digital or analog, we are still talking about material reality. It is also an actual thing. It is not an imagined library. There is a library of the world, and it has very specific documents in it. And when we talk about digital things, there are very specific files, there are very specific databases, there are very specific bit streams, as we call them, that carry with them the cultural heritage of the planet. Some would argue that even nature has been affected by our culture in such a way that the planet itself is its own library of human activity. Now, I don't want to go into such extremes and would just ask us to humbly limit ourselves to the archive of cultural artifacts, of literature, of philosophy, of art, etc. With such a limit, perhaps we might start wrapping our heads around this total library of the world. But just like Borges, even if we want to understand the actual library of the world, we still have to think of a language. We still have to come up with ways to describe its form. And because libraries themselves are a result of social activity and in turn inform our societies, we must also be mindful to describe them in such a way that we do not forget about their relationship to us, how they shape us and how we shape it in return. Now, the heuristic or the trick that I thought to help us start building such a language was to present to you two different models of what people want that library to be. Some people want that library to be the Tower of Babylon. And in the Christian tradition, for those of you who are not Christian or not familiar with the Christian text, the story of the Tower of Babel is simple. It's a story of a group of people in ancient Babylon who ambitiously decided to build a tower that would reach the sky. So they set in motion all this labor to build a centralized tower that would be so tall that it would reach the sky and they could talk to God. Now, God got angry, the God of the Christians, in this case, the God of the Hebrews, because this is in the Old Testament, got angry and destroyed the tower and condemned humanity to speak very different languages so that they wouldn't understand each other. Now, in the Bible, this is a warning to those who would like to create a central tower to reach the gods. In the world of libraries, this is the impulse of those who would like to create a central library of the world and would try to absorb everything. This sort of impulse has led to some real projects, like, for example, and let me share my screen so that I can show you with some images. Like, for example, WorldCat. This is it's a catalog of books and journals from all over the world, collected by a nonprofit organization called OCLC. And their goal is nothing short of collecting all of the books of the world and trying to give you access to them by telling you what library closest to you has this text. So if I look for Borges here, I will find all the cataloged books of Borges or on Borges, and it would tell me what library is the closest one to me, in this case, Yale University Library. Other such Babel libraries include, for example, Google Books, which also set out to do the same, to try to collect the total collection of all books. Now, on the other side of this metaphor that I'm going to use at the beginning today to try to get us to start talking, to construct a language that can help us talk about this, is what I call Havana, or the city of Havana, the Havana model. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Cuba. There's a fascinating city, Havana, a fascinating society. And that city grew organically, despite the attempts at preserving its colonial legacy. After the Cuban Revolution, the Cuban people had to figure out ways to make the space livable for them, especially during the special period of the 1990s after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they were left to their own devices. The city started growing in ways that no architect and no urban planner could ever design or plan. Everybody grew according to their necessity. what the theorist and Cuban architect Ernesto Orosa calls architectures of necessity. Now, in this vision, we have a lot of moss, a lot of organic growth. Everybody is doing their own little thing. And it is impossible to understand it as something coherent. Between these two extremes, perhaps our minds can start understanding what the library, the actual library of the world is today. This large, vast, centralized operations, and this other world made up of fragments, broken fragments that are everywhere. Now, okay, our lab, the Group for Experimental Method in the Humanities, which you mentioned already, Young Men, started being interested in the idea of understanding this world at scale about 9 years ago, probably since the beginning. Me and Dennis together were interested in some of these questions, which in the United States at that particular point were called distant reading. This is a concept that has been used around the world. I am not sure 100% who coined it. It might have been Franco Moretti. Dennis might know the answer of who coined the term distant reading. But 10 years ago, when me and Dennis were starting at Columbia, it was a very prominent sort of heuristic that people were interested in finding out ways in which we could read literature at a distance. Me and Dennis were both interested in understanding the sort of construction of the archive at very large distances. And we set about with some experiments and some projects. And one of them I will use as an example of the type of work that we wanted to do. This is one of our first projects that we worked on together. We were principal investigators with Joe Karaganis and Ted Byfield, and received a generous grant from the Sloan Foundation to start collecting the syllabi written in English that were available in the English language openly on the internet. And we started collecting, I think around that time, we collected like about 1.5 million syllabi. Now, the project is no longer with us. Me and Dennis are not, the project is not in a lab. We passed it to Joe Karaganis after me and Dennis were involved for 2 or 3 years and then moved on. And they have done a great job, a fantastic job of keeping the database growing. And now by now they have 7.3 million syllabi. Now, once all of these syllabi are collected, the collection goes through a series of processes, some using machine learning or artificial intelligence, some other older techniques for extracting the citations, cleaning up the data set, making sure what we have is our syllabi. By the way, I don't know if the word syllabi translates, but this is the course readings. Or before every course, you assign the books and articles that your students are going to read. We call this document a syllabus. I don't know how it's called in Korean, but I hope it translates. It's what we give the students for them to know what they are going to read, right? Now, in this, once you extract the citations, once you find out what are the texts being taught, then we can do a lot of interesting things to analyze what is being taught in the English language. The first thing, of course, that you can do is find out what are the texts that are being taught the most. So right on the homepage of the Open Syllabus project, you find a list of the top texts being taught in the English language. The #1 text that is taught around the world in English is the Elements of Style. This is a grammar style text that professors use in order to teach writing to our students, because in most universities in the English-speaking world, it is obligatory that students learn about writing. So this is a very common text that we use. As you start scrolling down, then you start seeing more literary and philosophical text. Like, for example, number 4 is the Communist Manifesto. Number 5 is the Republic. Now, when you click on these on one of these texts, you find the other texts that are taught with it. So, for example, we learned that the Communist Manifesto is not taught in classes, mostly in classes about communism, but it is taught in classes about Western philosophical tradition. You can see, because these other texts are also taught with it. These texts are there with it because they have what we call a proximity score that is high. A proximity score here is if, for example, in any given syllabus that you find the Communist Manifesto, you will probably also find the Second Treatise of Government and the Leviathan. So they appear together a lot. Based on this proximity score, we can also start devising visualizations, graphic instruments that can help us understand sort of the ecosystem where these texts exist. So this is what's called the Open Syllabus Galaxy. In the circle you see here is the Communist Manifesto. Each circle is one document. The size of the circle is how much it is taught. The Communist Manifesto is big because it is taught a lot. The circles that are close to it are texts that have a high proximity score to the Communist Manifesto. So all of these texts are commonly taught close to the Communist Manifesto, and the farther you get away from it, the less they are taught with the Communist Manifesto. One of the effects of this is that we create a graph that allows us to see how classes start being different from each other. This, in turn, has the added effect of starting to draw fields of inquiry, disciplines in the academy in English. So, for example, over here we find the classes, the texts that are taught in sociology. Here are the texts that are taught in anthropology. If I scroll up, I know that philosophy is around here. I find Plato here. This is the Descartes. And as I start scrolling out, we start getting what we can call the galaxy of human knowledge in the English language today. These are all the sciences, all the disciplines teaching today in 2022, and all of the texts that are taught in those courses. Now, this is one example of many where we start devising a language, and that language is both graphic and textual, fragmentary, where the entries in a database allows us to start discussing a vast field of knowledge. In this case, the library of things that are taught in the English language. Now, after we start understanding this library, start manipulating this library, there are certain things that happen because of this broken effect, this tension between Havana and Babel. Now I use the word all of the classes in the world, all of the texts, but that is not exactly right. These syllabi that are in this database are not all the syllabi in the world. These are only the syllabi in the world that are online. and that we could find. So many people around the world probably have syllabi that are not online. And this graphic would be different if we understood those. But these are not even only the syllabi that are online, they're the syllabi that are open online. So many of you that are using systems that only work inside the university have syllabi that you need a password to get. We don't have those. So this representation, again, is not a complete representation and not a perfect representation. This tension between the centralization of all knowledge and the fact that there is this brokenness is the next thing that I want to talk about in terms of the results that come out of our exercises. I will use one example to show you and now introduce the theme of machine learning and artificial intelligence of what happens when we assume that we are working with the Tower of Babylon and forget that we are also in the world of Havana. In one of the important themes in the United States right now for scholarship is the recovery of the voices that have been silenced from the archive. In the past 500 years, after Christopher Columbus arrived on the shores of America, we see, in the broadest sense, a movement of colonization from Europeans to America that leads to the extermination of many native populations, leads to the kidnapping, a violent kidnapping and trade of African populations into America, where they are then forced to toil. During those 500 years, also, we see the growth of the Library of the World. This is in these 500 years is where we see the Enlightenment, the creation of the modern university, and the enormous explosion of books and articles. But in that history, for example, if we wanted to go and find the biographies or the histories written by Black or indigenous people, by African descendants in the 18th century, we will not find them, right? So right now there is an impulse, a desire, a necessity for scholars to try to figure out how to recover the voices of those who were killed, of those who were kidnapped, of those who were forced to work. Now, this is an impossible task. How does one read the silence of the archive? One of the mistakes we make is only reading what is present and available and convincing ourselves that this is what history is. This is a mistake. So, but also now we are faced with this impossibility. How do we read the silences? Well, people have suggested many strategies, many methods, but one of them that is very recent is the use of machine learning in order to start to try to recover some of these voices. So let me show you an example of a project that does this. So this is here. This is a bot called Tweets from Runaway Slaves. Now, this bot was created by somebody who works in data science, artificial intelligence, in finance. A black man who is doing very well, has a lot of money, and put his team to work on trying to find data on the internet that would allow him to reconstruct the voices of slaves who ran away from their plantation where they worked. So the main data set for this bot that construct these stories, every single tweet is a story told in the first person, and it is composed by machine learning after finding a lot of data from the internet. The main source of this data comes from a database done in a library, in a research library called Freedom on the Move, that collected all newspaper clippings of these what I call these ads, runaway ads that the slave plantation owners would place on the newspaper in order to try to find their missing property. Now, if this tweet was only doing that, showing one of these ads, that would be fine, but that's not the only thing they do. What they do is they go on other sides of the internet to do what is called a mashup. One of them are they go into some genealogy sites. They go into other databases. For example, they also go, I know this because I reverse engineered some of their tweets. They go into this database that helps people find where people are buried. Find the grave website, and that has information also about the lives of people. So in all this fragmentary library of the internet, they dig for information and construct this. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that now these voices become full of false information. And we know, because if you are a researcher, a historian, you can reverse engineer some of these tweets and find out, do some real research, much better than machine learning, and see that these narratives are false. So now we are reconstructing human beings that never existed. And of course, this person is completely convinced that they're doing something good, but are they? We have to be careful about how the machines are transforming our past. But to be fair, the problem here is not with machine learning. The problem here is with the libraries that machine learning is using being broken. The fact that this only has very limited and precise access to some libraries and some texts, and not others. So this is the part so far where human beings, us, are still capable of probably doing a better job of understanding the past than machine learning. Mostly our ability to traverse the brokenness of the library of the world, between the libraries that are legal, the libraries that are illegal, the ones that are open access, the ones that are not open access, the ones that are analog, and the ones that are digital. The machine, in order to be able to do this job, if it is going to ever do it properly, would have to have access to the Library of Babel, which it does not. And it probably never will, because the construction of that library depends on us, and us being able to come up with a society that can produce it. And I just don't see that happening. Now, I will reach my conclusion now, which is an invitation to think, though, about how machine learning, artificial intelligence, will continue to transform the total library of the world in its own way, and how we perhaps may position ourselves in relationship to that reconstruction. First of all, just so you understand my religion, I do not believe that machines think. This is not part of my religion. But I do believe that machines, that artificial intelligence can write very well. And I also believe that machines can also, and it doesn't have to be artificial intelligence, the old algorithmic machines can also write fairly well. And they can also paint and create sounds. They can do that very well without thinking. In fact, it turns out that thinking was not needed in order to do this. So this is my religion. Now, based on this religion, it is clear to me that machines are now going to become producers of culture with us. They already are. They are going to constantly produce new culture that will become part of the library. It is already becoming part of the library. Some paintings produced by Dali have already won some human prizes. students are now can avail themselves of papers, undergraduate papers that they can submit that are completely original. All of these things are a reality, and they become part of the library of the world. Whether librarians collect them or not, there are other mechanisms here that are doing the collecting, something we could call the record. Things are being recorded. This is not stopping. So now we have two things to think about in the future. One, how do we channel the machines into our institutional libraries, the production of these machines in a careful way? How do we reestablish authority? 10 years ago when I was a graduate student, authority was the last thing that I wanted to reestablish. But now as I get older, I want to start being a better friend to authority. How do we reestablish authority in the face of this massive production? And two, how do we think about the antidotes towards their inevitable effects? How do we imagine a relationship to this cultural production that is not dangerous to us at all levels, political, cultural, etc.? This is the two questions that I leave you with, are more or less the same question. I hope this is a good beginning to Dennis's comments. And I hope also in the question and answer, this can actually spark conversation about how librarians and faculty can work together, because this is the world in which we are going to work together. So thank you very much. I look forward, Dennis, to listening to your talk, and I look forward to the question and answer. Thank
you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your very provocative the introduction to the whole discussion. I think between the two words of digital library of Babel, and then what you said, the Creaky city of Havana, there are much things to talk about the bridge, and at the same time, the artificial intelligence, algorithmic understanding of cultural production. At the same time, how do we understand the authority of all this kind of the new understanding, algorithmic understanding of the world in a different way? So maybe we have much things to talk about. Your question, provocative questions are maybe have to be seriously dealt with later when we have reaching the second panelist discussion. So maybe to continue your introductory, also at the same time, the vast amount of the knowledge base kind of thinking. So maybe we have to move over to Dennis. Dennis' way of the artificial intelligence, algorithmic understanding of the new way of understanding strange thinking. So maybe I can introduce Dennis Tenen. Dennis E. Tenen is Associate Professor of English Literature, Digital Humanities, and New Media Studies at Columbia University, a long-time affiliate of the Columbia Data Science Institute, and formerly a Microsoft engineer and Berkman Center for Internet and Society Fellow. His code runs on millions of personal computers worldwide. His research happens at the intersection of text, people, and technologies. He is one of the founders of Columbia's Group for Experimental Methods in the Humanities of the scale, and author of the Plain Text, The Poetics of Computation in 2017, Stanford University Press. You can find him on the Twitter. Actually, before this symposium, I have to be the friend of the Twitter friend. I haven't used it for many years, but now I'm beginning to use since the knowing a lot of his work. Dennis now I'm a friend, a Twitter friend. And then GitHub at GitHub.com Denton and Stack Exchange. He teaches courses on literary theory, media history, computational narratology, and critical computing at the Department of English and Comparative Literature, Columbia University. He also occasionally teaches at Columbia's Journalism School, in the Computer Science Department, and the DHSI, which is the University of Victoria Summer School. And his affiliation include New Media Center at the Institute of Data Science and Engineering and Institute for Computer and Society. He is the author of many books and articles, plain text, the project computation. His work appears also on the pages of a modern boundary to computational culture, modernism and modernity, new literary history, public books, and LA review books on topics that range from book piracy to algorithmic composition, unintelligence, the design, and history of data visualization. For an updated list of projects, talks, and publications, you can visit dennistannen.com. I think I realized that as I read his books and articles, I realized actually I was trying to find the partner of my research, and he might be the real authentic partner with Alex Gill. So maybe next project, maybe I can offer some kind of collaboration. So Dennis, so your turn.
Hello, folks. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to be here. And thank you so much for Youngmin Kim for organizing this. Thank you to Dongguk University, to the Korean Association of Digital Humanities, National Research Foundation of Korea, and everybody who made this possible. I really a big thanks to you. Now I'm going to try to do something. I'm going to share a second screen. Let me know if you see this well. Do you see this? Okay, that's us. So we did this. Now the work I'm covering here comes from this. This is a book that I'm writing for Norton. It's called Literary Theory for Robots. It should come out next year. This was the book proposal. So I'm kind of going to try to summarize this book. Obviously, we only have 20 minutes. Let me set my timer. We only have 30 minutes. So what I'd like to do is give you a sketch. I want to give you a diagram. And we will be exploring this diagram throughout this talk. Let's see, how can I make this? Let's try this. Does that work? No. We'll keep it like that. Yeah. We'll be exploring this diagram throughout this this talk, but like I said, it's really like a sketch. You know, it's a very sketchy diagram that you know, each one of these nodes in the diagram is really a chapter. So I'd like to just give you like a taste, and also I'd like to give you the sense of a mystery of how I started on this project and kind of unanswered questions that motivated this project called Literary Theory for Robots. And I think at the end, where this diagram leads, and you'll see, is I want to suggest not only methodologically, you know, new directions in literary studies that Alex already discussed, but also an archive of literature that normally doesn't make its way to literature departments, but that actually comprises the vast bulk of things being written today. Okay, so let me give you these two little mysteries that started my work. So the first mystery is that I was reading Prop. I don't know if you're familiar with Prop. Let me see if I have Prop. So do you know this guy? So Vladimir Prop, Russian, one of the Russian formalists, 1927, he wrote this very influential book, Morphology of the Folktale. It was translated into English in 1958. Now note here, this is also should be a familiar name. It was translated by Svatava Jakobsen, who is the spouse of Jakobsen, the linguist, the Harvard linguist, who, and you'll kind of see names, hopefully, that you recognize in this surrounding Prop, and these are the names that were central to bringing Prop's work to the West and to kind of to internationally making this work popular. You'll also see in the acknowledgements for the morphology of the folktale, you see this name, Thomas Seebach, who's also an incredible linguist, you know, 1960s, 70s, late 50s, worked on animal communication, worked on early computer science project, and him and Jakobsen's Jakobsen are kind of very important nodes in this intellectual genealogy that I'm exploring, right? So to go back to, oh, this is, by the way, Propp is famous. If you don't know what he's famous for, Propp is famous for taking the folktale, and it's a formalist approach to the study of folktale, and he wanted to find the formula that could explain all folktales, right? So the key question for Propp, for Vladimir Propp, and for formalists and structuralists that come after him, was to say, how is it possible that you have folktale traditions, you have Korean folktales, you have Finnish folktales, you have Russian folktales that may not have had much cultural contact historically with each other, but yet they exhibit the same kind of features, and they exhibit the same structures. So there's something about the structures of folktale for Propp and formalists in general that seem to be universal and seem to kind of, and they thought, oh, maybe we'll find the formula. We'll find the formula for old world folktales. Now, Alex already cautioned us against the world library, the world formula, right? This kind of desire to find the answer, the totalizing answer for everything. So we'll have that in mind as well. So to go back to my diagram, when I was reading Propp, when I was reading folktale, the folktale morphology, I was wondering, this is so interesting, this is fascinating, it's this is like 20th century, this is like 1920s, right? So in the 1920s, where is he getting this stuff? So my question is, okay, Propp is often cited. Now, after Propp come the formalists, right? Formalist. Then you have the structuralist, right? This is like literary history, right? The history of our profession. So you have structure, you have post-structuralist, right? And so on until 21st century, until today. So we have this kind of lineage, right? From Propp to formalist to structuralist. And I won't, most of you are literary scholars, this history, the rejection of structuralists in the English department, in the literature departments, in the study of linguistics. It's already a complicated history. But the thing is, this direction is well known. It's but the only mystery. So when I was reading it, I knew where this intellectual genealogy is going, but I really had a question mark as to where it came from. And when I consulted the leading historians of structuralism and of formalism, their answer was very dissatisfying to me. Often they will bring up maybe some 19th century textual scholarship kind of work. Maybe they'll bring up some kind of linguistics. But point is, there was not a really great answer in the literature of where Propp got this idea that all of world folktales can be reduced to a formula, right? So, and okay, in the book, again, it's a complicated answer. Going this way, it's a complicated answer of the history of this particular idea that leads us to today. Now, the other mystery I want to give to you is that I want to suggest an alternative direction, right? I want to suggest an alternative direction. It's a direction which comes out of Propp. It comes out of this sort of this lineage, and it leads. Now, there's a few missing links, right? But let me tell you where it leads. It leads to today. It leads to something Alex was talking about. Today's production of text. So textual production, things being written in the world today, the vast majority of those things are being written by computers, right? We are in the age of algorithmic composition. Now, we expect, I think that very often when you hear the term machine literature, we expect machine literature to be, machine generated poetry or machine generated fiction, or maybe it's stories, machine generated stories. But that's not the case. I mean, I'm not very interested in reading machine generated poetry, and not many people do that. But what machines write? So the first question even to ask is, what do machines write? But if you think about it, machines write a lot of stuff, and they write stuff for us, and they write stuff for each other as well. So the few examples I gave in my abstract were, when you go to a doctor's office, right? So you go to your doctor's office, you tell a doctor your symptoms, you say, my arm hurts, or I have a fever. That conversation is transcribed. Often it's transcribed automatically, right? There is an audio recording. That audio recording gets mined for keywords, right? Headache, pain, fever. Those words get mined by machine. Though the keywords that are being extracted from this patient interaction are then put in another system, which translates the story. I'm telling my doctor a story of how I feel, right? And the machine is translating the story into diagnostic codes, right? So headache corresponds to, whatever medical code for a particular diagnosis, and it ultimately translates those codes into billable codes that go to the insurance agency, right? So I'm just giving you kind of an anecdote here, a little sketch of how a seemingly non-textual interaction. This has to do with your body, this has to do with your physician, this has to do with the hospital, with medicine, right? But underneath it, in that interaction, there is a vast layer of textual production that's happening. It's machines extracting, analyzing language, they're extracting language, they're dealing with stories, they're dealing with human stories. When we tell stories about our body, they're not straightforward. They're full of metaphor, right? They're full of hyperbole. And machines are in that space of human language, and they're working with that human language, and they're translating, right? There is translation happening, and this archive of textual information is being bounced around from database to database to database. The conversation gets transcribed. It gets sent in the US, it often gets sent outsourced to East Asia or Eastern Europe to be extracted, to be analyzed. So this is just one example of how a mundane human interaction, and underneath that human interaction, there is a vast textual archive that's being continually produced and churned and churned and churned. And that's where we are today. If you look at the amount of information that underlies textual production, that underlies every field of human activity, not just literary activity, literature like fiction and poetry, but literature with a small l. Literature is just textual activity. Almost every field of human activity produces, and often in a hidden way, produces a vast, vast archive of text. It's a vast library, but it's a different library than Alex is saying. It's a database, it's code, it's natural language. It has all the stuff that we're familiar with. It has the metaphor, it has translation, it has issues of authorship. It's a lot of things that are key to our profession. A lot of words and concepts and theoretical ideas that are key to our profession. But it's happening in this very alien environment. It's the environment which we as literary scholars do not often visit. And I think we should. I mean, if there's kind of a big takeaway point of this talk, is that this other tradition that comes out of prop and that leads us to today. Now I'll talk a little bit about where it leads us. But this tradition deserves its own study. It needs kind of new ways of study, but not just methodologically new ways of study. It needs even the recognition of these archives. Now, I put GPT-3 here. GPT-3 again it's yet another but very compelling example of machines that write today in the 21st century. So this is a contemporary writing machine. Now, folks, strap in your seatbelts. Sit down if you're not sitting down. So what I did is when I was writing my book, when I was writing this book, I took every chapter of this book and I fed it into GPT-3, okay? So these paragraphs here were written by GPT-3, which is a machine learning algorithm, which takes, now it's a very tricky algorithm. The machine learning algorithm takes what you wrote, and the more you teach it, the more it begins to emulate what you are writing. And it takes what you wrote and it begins to improvise. Now, it's not just, so it's the training, so training corpus, training, right? And then you have just like English language, right? And so you have whatever you gave it as a prompt, but also it just kind of speaks the language in general. And then it begins to improvise. Now, it begins so like a child, it does it in stages. So it will begin to try to imitate you. And then you can say, no, that doesn't sound like me. And then it will try, and it will do it over many generations. So over many generations of training and getting better, it begins to really catch how you're speaking. So here's an example of some of the early, so this is when it still didn't know what, it still didn't understand me, this machine, GPT-3. And it read my book. I gave it was trained. I gave it my book. So this is, my book went here, right? All the chapters I put in here. And this is what it produced. This is the machine writing now. The machine writes, as an exercise, imagine for a moment that you're a writer living in a cave or ravine, and that you must sustain yourself on a diet of cave-dwelling rodents. How would you find a way to survive? By hunting them down, you would find their discarded food, their litter, and their excrement. You would then be left with nothing more than a vague sense of existential dissatisfaction. Would you continue writing if your life depended on it? Or would you prefer to go back to eating cave mice and waiting for them to devour your writing? To devour your writing. How nice is it, right? What a strange, weird. Now, if you look for this, any one of these sentences, if you search for them in Google, this is entirely original writing because it was created with the training from my book. There is no, it's not recycling pre-made phrases. This is entirely original writing. Now, this was like, this was like generation 100. So the training at generation note, I gave it a scholarly book, but it produced kind of like maybe that's how I felt about my writing. It produced like an existential piece of prose that's beautiful in its own way, very strange and beautiful. But then by like generation, 100,000. So this is generation 100,000. It produced this paragraph. And, by the way, I did not edit these. These are exactly how it was appearing. And, what I didn't include, this is so funny, folks. It produces footnotes that sound like real footnotes, but they're fake. So because it sees footnotes that are, Propp, Jakobson, other literary scholars. So it begins to produce, footnotes that look like footnotes. They're properly punctuated. And but when you look them up, it's just entirely fictional. So now this is the machine writing, GPT. Actually, I'm sorry, this is GPT-2, actually. It's not 3, this is 2. I wrote this a bit, last year. Now, okay, listen to this. What was wrong with the study of history as a change in the social and the historical context in which it is posted? Was that history did not resemble particular moments or societies. It happened all the time, everywhere, with the exact same kinds, structures, institutions, and histories. De Costra's system, now this is fake. This here is not a real, this is not a real footnote. De Costra's system accordingly could not explain how the social and the institutional differed qualitatively, nor how these differences could be used to explain the differences in the empirical facts about human history. Structuralists thus face two compelling claims. First, that a unified theory of history could explain all differences between stories for all time, as well as, crucially, how such theories could explain differences in the context in which they were posited. Now, I know this is a heavy sentence, but note that it's kind of saying something similar that Alec said. It said that structuralism struggles with balancing the universal story, the universal library, the universal formula for everything, and the local, which is the contextual. So, I mean, this completely blew my mind, right? So and that is part of the argument in my book. And the fact that it could understand that by reading, 4 preceding chapters was really, really remarkable. Second, this is continuing. Second, that a unified theory of history is possible at all, given the right empirical structure. To further these claims, we need to know more about storytelling in human history. That is to say, the structure of narrative, in fact, was itself subject to systematic change at the hands of narrative engineers. Systematic change at the hands of narrative engineers. I've never used the phrase narrative engineers, but I like it a lot. The computer came up with the idea of narrative engineers. The history I am proposing, I am very briefly outlining for you today. This alternative, remember how I said we understand how the work of formalists, the work of structuralists, how it led to post-structuralism, how it led to kind of the contemporary shape of literary study today. But what I want to kind of suggest to you, and we can open it up to discussion, is that there is this alternative influence that people like Propp, people like Jacobson, traditional canonical literary scholars, Margaret Masterman, I mean, there's many more names on that list, but it's how traditional folklore studies, literary theory, how it has this alternative history in and for narrative engineers. Let's use the term that GPT-3 has made for us. There is a history of narrative engineering that I'm trying to kind of expose a little bit, but it's a history that has happened in computer science departments. So it happened in computer science department, and it has its own, particularly as we rejected over here, as we rejected structuralism in literary studies, structuralism was welcomed, accepted, and developed in a huge way, in a way that leads us to GPT-3, in a way that leads us to the doctor's office, in a way that leads us to the machine that is continually writing and processing the things that we are thinking, the things that we are writing. Your spam folder. Open up your spam folder and see the fruits of machine-generated text. Look at the spam filter that's, as a kind of a literary critic that's continually looking at, reading, rejecting, evaluating. This is a bad message. This is a good message. So this is the lineage of narrative engineering that leads us to the kind of textual environment mediated by computation today. Now, let me see how much time I have. 1 second. Still have 7 minutes. So let me now, as I told you, we can go this way historically, beyond, before 20th century. It's a long conversation. It's a long conversation, something that Alex in his role, I'm just going to kind of give you a suggestion. Alex in his role, he's in the Spanish department, Latin speaking languages. There was a medieval theologian. His name was Ramon Llull, L-U-L-L. So Ramon Llull, circa 14th, 15th century, something like that. But he made these devices that were algorithmic generation devices, where they were circles like this, and the circles contained formulas. They contained, just like Propp was looking for the formula of the folktale, Llull was looking for a formula for theology, for understanding God. And so he would say, for example, he would say like, proposition K means, God is great. And then, greatness maybe, and then God is also all powerful. And that's this part. And then you rotate them and you can algorithmically generate all possible attributes of divinity, right? So this is a theological algorithm that systematically explores all possible things we can think or believe about God. And Ramon Llull was hugely influential for people like Descartes and Leibniz, for example. And Descartes and Leibniz as people who, and Francis Bacon, for example. And these are the people who lie at the roots of computer science, right? Binary encoding, calculus. I mean, a lot of the things that kind of are precursors to contemporary computer science come out of this text generation that was practiced by Ramon Llull and a huge number of his followers. There were study groups and kind of cults and institutions all across Europe that were practicing this sort of text generation on a theological basis. But anyway, again, just a glimpse of, if we travel this way, right? We travel historically before 20th century, it kind of goes back to Lowell, right? And then if we travel this way, this is kind of 20th century, right? 20th century, GPT is 21st century. I want to highlight one more kind of, one more text from my archive that I think illustrates very well this alternative narrative engineering history that happened during the 20th century specifically. So let me move this. We talked about this. So now, check this out. This is going to also, I hope you're just as entertained as I am with these texts. So look at this paper. So this is 1999. So very ending of the 20th century. Note the authors: Peter Clark, Boeing Company. This is written by the Boeing, the airplane company. And the paper is called Story Generation and Aviation Incident Representation, right? So what the Boeing engineers were interested in is they were interested in, so you know how an airplane has a black box, right? And the black box reports any accident detail. So if the plane is, has an engine failure, the black box records engine failure. But what I didn't know, what I learned from this paper is that, there are also minor incidents. So maybe like the air system was just malfunctioning, or maybe like a passenger got sick. A passenger got sick on the plane. The black box records all incidents. So whatever is out of the ordinary that happens during a flight, the black box records, right? So Boeing engineers were, what they have is the stream of data of all the incidents that happened during a flight. But then they were interested in creating a story, a report that takes all these incidents and puts it in like one story. So, like flight from New York to Seoul, Korea. It took off normally. During the flight, a passenger got sick. The AC air conditioning malfunctioned for 1 minute, but then it fixed itself, and the rest of the flight proceeded without an incident, right? So that's a story. That's a story that has the beginning and end. It has characters. It has like literally an arc, right, of a plane leaving and coming. It's a homecoming story, right? It's a homecoming story. It's a story of a journey. And so to create stories from data, from black box data, the Boeing engineers were reading this paper here. So this is me being a detective and trying to kind of follow the line. So, what are the precursors of GPT-3, this contemporary algorithm? Okay, and I started looking at the literature, and I see, okay, in the late 90s, Boeing is writing stories. Where does Boeing, what do they cite? Well, they're citing this Tailspin, Tailspin story generator, right? 1977, Mihan was a graduate student, I believe at Princeton. And when you read this paper takes props. It takes props, folktale, the idea that folktales have a beginning and an end, that idea that there is a structure to a folktale, the idea that that structure can be made into an algorithm that comes from prop. Mihan over here reads prop and makes a story generation out of prop. And it's just like a little toy story generation that's based on events. It's an event-based story generator. And Mihan creates a toy model. The Boeing engineers, that's time. Let me just conclude here quickly. The Boeing engineers take Mihan's work, props work, and create their own story generator, right? That generates stories like this, imperative transponder and climb out from airport, return, put it on MEL, continued flight, right? They create a system that is today a part of our aviation system. So here's another example, aviation, when next time you board a flight, you think this has nothing to do with literature. This has nothing to do with my field. It's not so. There's plenty about flights. I'm not saying, everything is literature, medicine is literature, aviation is literature. No. But a part of that flight that you will board, a part of your visit to the doctor has a story generating component. And it involves ideas from literary scholarship. It involves ideas like authorship, ideas like metaphor, ideas like structure, ideas like translation. They're ideas that are intimately familiar to us as literary scholars. And so in conclusion, here's my kind of call to you, is that I am writing this history, this kind of unknown history, unknown genealogical branch of the literary arts that leaves the literary departments and blooms into this incredible kind of machine generating environment, right? And I am saddened, and I want to recruit you to my cause. It is too bad, I think, that we have lost sight of this branch. It's too bad that not more literary scholars are participating in the study of this textual composition. And it's too bad that we don't participate more in the design of systems like GPT-3, like the Boeing system, like the many other algorithmic story generators that I explore in my book. So I think I will end there. I hope that's enough to get you interested. I hope it's enough to suggest answers to this mystery. Where does prop come from? And the alternative history of structuralism, of formalism, of this propian idea that brings us to the place where we are today. So very much looking forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis Tenen. Frank speaking, this is beyond my field, and sometimes I'm not sure whether I understand the GPT-3 and some algorithmic, but still, I feel like there's the alternative history, hidden history in the algorithmic thinking. The technology is what's at stake. Maybe from the discussion, maybe we can have a multiple way of dealing with these questions that we brought up, which is very highly provocative. Maybe do we need some break, or we just continue to have the discussion? I think we don't need, since we have spent 1.5. Do you need some break, 5 minutes break, or do we continue? What would you like? I mean, the Dennis and Alex first. What would you like? Do you need a break?
We can take a 5-minute break. Why not? Let everybody breathe, absorb.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so everybody can take a break. 5 minutes. So we'll return the 10:30. 10:30. We'll start 10:30 and starting with the panel discussion. Okay, 10:30. We'll have a brief kind of break. Thank you.
Monsieur Denis. Good job, man. I love that book. Get it out. You know, Dennis, I was just reading McGann's Radiant Textuality again because I'm teaching it this week, and of course he traces he never lets go of procedural writing in the literary studies department. He's trying to connect it to this tradition that you're going to explore, but this is 1999 or 2000, and he's so clunky. Like he just doesn't see it anymore. He can't see it yet. Yeah. It's funny to reading him, listening to you, to know like that already 20 years ago he was hungry for this.
No, and you know, certainly textual scholars are much more sensitive to, you know, I think they have less limitations about what's considered text. So they it was clear to them much earlier that computers are participating.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if you ever read this Panizzi lectures by D.F. Mackenzie.
I have not. No.
You are going to love it.
Can you send me the screenshot or send me the? I'd love it.
Yeah, you will find it immediately interesting. It's called Bibliography and the Sociology of Texts.
Ooh, super interesting. Drop it in text. It's going to be interesting to other people as well. Just drop the the title in chat.
I will drop it in a second. Here's the link to WorldCat.
Yeah, for some reason I have been blocked for the unmute myself. I don't know why, but yeah, now I can. Let's see. Sorry about the delay. Now we turn to the next phase. So the we reverse the order. Maybe the first panelist will talk about the Dennis tenants. That's the lecture first. So maybe Professor Joe Bradley and Alice Taekang Lee will be the first to respond. So, but before that, maybe I can introduce. I try to find the documents here. Yeah, I find it. Sorry about this, Bessie. Professor Joe Bradley, he's the professor of Heikyo University in Tokyo and Japan. Actually, he teaches philosophy and literature and language. He's a visiting fellow at the Kyunghee University in Seoul, South Korea, where Alice Taekang Lee is teaching, and was a visiting professor at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, India. And Professor Joe Bradley has co-written a pedagogy of cinema and co-edited books on Deleuze and Buddhism, Utopia, and the New French Thought, and Principles of Transversality, and Japanese Education and Critical Thought, and Bernard Stiegler. I think he is a specialist in Bernard Stiegler. I learned a lot from him about Bernard Stiegler. But my research about Stiegler comes from him. Thanks to him. And then he is the author of the Thinking with the Animation, and will publish 2 books on deluge, Qatari, and schizoanalysis in 2022. Professor Joe Bradley will respond first, and then I will continue to introduce Professor Alex Taekwang Lee. Professor Alex Taekwang Lee is my close friend, and he's a professor of the cultural studies at Gyeonggi University in South Korea. He's very well known cultural critic in South Korea. He's a close friend of the Zizek. So he invited Zizek to Korea. We have multiple occasions, the public occasions. And he's a former visiting professor at Jamia Millia Islamia University in India. He's very well known in India. Strangely, he goes to India very often. He's a member of the advisory board for the International Deluge and Qatari Studies in Asia, and also the member of the Asia Theology Network. He's the organizer, and then board member of the International Consortium of Critical Theory Programs, ICCTP. So to the Delugian Qatarian, and will respond to the algorithmic reasoning of the Dennis Tennant. So maybe first of all, Professor Joe Bradley, would you like to read? Unmute. Please unmute. Joe. Oh, I had the same thing.
It's okay now. It's okay. It's okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, gentlemen, for absolutely brilliant talk. So I have some like perspective on it, both of your talk. So maybe I'm going to speak about, go across what you both said, because some way they seem to kind of go together. But I think one question that kept on coming up in both your talks and Dennis's talk is like, what is the role of the university? So I was thinking about that, listening to both of you. What is the role of the university, and what is the difference between a library and a database? And I guess where I'm going to come from, because in Dennis's talk we're hearing about textual productivity and algorithmic composition, and GPT, is it right? GPT-3 and what that was doing, and the machine learning algorithm and so on. And then you were talking about like looking for this other fascinating discussion about looking for another tradition from prop going, finding something that came before. So I found that absolutely fascinating. And then you began to talk about maybe the code can be considered, that the production of the language from the code could be strange and beautiful. So my question then would be like, what is the nature of that beauty in the code? So from that, you were kind of said what you seem to like look back for was like looking for the formula. Okay, so the machine learning algorithm was looking for the formula, right? For example, from the folklore. But in my case, I guess like maybe I was looking for like the exception to it. So then when I was thinking about this idea of looking for the exception, then I was looking for this kind of a question of resistance to calculation. So what does that mean? So this idea of a resistance to a calculation then, recently I've been reading a lot of Heidegger, so I guess maybe that's going to come out, but when you look for like another tradition, I think Heidegger, and then I'll talk about Stiegler a little bit, but Heidegger would say he's looking for like another beginning for thinking, okay? And that's because calculation, okay, algorithmic governmentality, or the whatever you want to call it nowadays, that somehow kind of extinguishes the truth. So that's that other tradition kind of extinguish a kind of truth, okay? Because this, when things, well, what does that mean? It means then calculation reduces everything down to sameness and correctness, okay? Yeah. So then that means that, of course, the logic is that there's the oblivion of being follows from that. So that other beginning for thinking would be the oblivion of being, and that would mean like the loss of wonder in being, okay? So when I was thinking about that, that brought me to Stiegler. Now I read the material that was sent to me, and there was mention of Stiegler and Yukvi and Galloway and people like that. So that made me think about what Stiegler said, and I think you kind of spotted it, like what's happened to the World Wide Web since the early 1990s, okay? And that means that the World Wide Web has somehow become toxic and entropic. Okay? It's suggesting, what Stiegler was saying, suggests a kind of closed system of thought. So he was looking for like I guess he was looking for like the exception or the singularity of language. So my question would be like, would something like GPT, would you state that there is a singularity of language in that, and that would mean that you can have creativity without thinking, right? I guess I heard one of you say that. So, but I guess the idea would that Stiegler would say that, so he's looking for the exception to calculation, okay? Because without that, well, with calculation, there's a destruction of difference. So would machinic kind of learning algorithm, would it preserve difference? That would be one thing. Because that would, yeah, because that preservation of difference would be the role of the university. So then going back to and I'll finish now, sorry for rambling on, but that drew me back to Alex's idea, and brilliant idea that's given me so much to think about this kind of this challenge to the tree of knowledge, would be the galaxy of knowledge, you could call it, right? And I thought that was really fascinating. But then that got me thinking about H.G. Wells and the world brain, okay? And what H.G. Wells said in the 1930s about the creation of the world brain. His time, the technology would be microfilm, like those machines. But the role of the library in this world brain would be the interpreter of information. So the librarians are there to interpret information for the public, because we are, in our time now, we are awash with information, but there's a crisis of knowledge. So I guess that thought, yeah, I mean, that again, the question would come back to what is the role of the university? So I'm sorry for rambling on a bit, but that might give some, maybe I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
I can probably start with when I latch on to that question about the difference between a database and a library, in order to begin to answer the question about the university. But impossible to answer the whole question in the time that we have. That is the question, and the answer is up to all of us. Who are the university? In bibliographic studies, I was trained as a textual scholar by people like Jerome Medan, David Vanderbuehler, G.T. Tansel, people whose life work has been dedicated to look at the materiality of text. These are also people, as I was mentioning, that are very interested in the procedural nature of textuality. By default, they're thinking about this and have been thinking about this for a very long time. And from these people, one of the things that I learned, even though none of them really expressed it this way to me directly when they were teaching me, is the possibility of breaking away from the bibliographic wrapping of any given text. Very simply put with an example. If we understand books only as that which is bound, if we understand textuality, bibliography is in the word, the biblios, as that which can be given a name, a title, an author, a date, then we reduce our understanding of the textual reality of the world. So I was encouraged, even without any of my mentors explicitly saying so, to break textuality away from the sort of container, the what we call now in digital terms, the metadata, that tries to convince us that a text is that which is bound within something. Now, a library today, it depends on this idea of the bibliographic unit. That's what it collects. That's what it lists in its catalog. So anytime you search in a library catalog, you will find something, an article, a book, a film, bound within this metadata understood as a unit. Now, a database could be fragments of this book paired with these other books. Anything that we do in data mining, topic modeling, or some of these other techniques that we use in digital humanities all the time, for the most part, usually breaks away from these boundaries and tries to find a little bit of a fragment of a text here and a little bit of a fragment of a text there. In fact, some of the most interesting and exciting projects that are being done to recover the voices of those enslaved communities of 3 centuries ago, 2 centuries ago, are projects that extract slave narratives from the texts, from the books, from the bound units that were written by the very same people that were oppressing them, that were violent against them. A great project in this regard is called the Database of Early Caribbean Literature, which is not interested in these books, in these authors. It is interested in the voices. So what it does is discards all of these bibliographic units and takes from them the small fragments, right? So the difference between a database and a library is the difference between how we rearrange. It is marked by how we decide to rearrange the world's bibliographic simplistic tendencies, whereas exemplastic means our desire to make things into a unit. The moment we explode this, we can rearrange them in many ways. And in terms of what I was saying, it behooves us to understand those things that behave like a library and those things that behave like a database equally as scholars. So while they are materially different, one depends on very old notions of what constitutes a text, and the new one, it just can fragment anything to a million different pieces. They both still contain the culture that it is our job to both steward and understand. How universities relate to that remains to be seen, because university research libraries still operate under the dominant metaphor of the unit, of the compiling of units, little pieces, as Samuel Beckett, and it will be hard to break them away from that. But we must. This is my beginning to an answer. Dennis, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Alex. Yes, thank you for the comments, Joff, and they're well taken. And I'm also, a careful reader of Heidegger and of that tradition in general. So I have a pragmatic answer that has to do with the universities and it has to do with literary departments. And then I have more of like a philosophical, intellectual answer. So the pragmatic answer is that note that the kind of material that I presented before you today is intensely academic. This is not a non-academic. A lot of this industry innovation or whatever in the space comes from not a lot, I'd say most of it. So it's just not happening in the humanities, and it's not happening in the English department. And I'm worried about that, because when you do the intellectual history of this material, you see that at some point, for people like Jakobson, for people like Seebach, there was not a distinction between the humanities and computer sciences. And they didn't think of computation, non-computation. They thought of this as language and kind of the history of language analysis and the history of language. And they thought of it as studying cognition in general. And they took it in a different direction with a lot of, I think, goodwill and invitation from, there was a moment where a conference where a folklore scholar and, the AI scholar from computer science had a lot to say to each other. Whereas today, this is much more rare. And that saddens me. And I think we have lost an opportunity. We've let go of a particular archive and a particular intellectual tradition that does pragmatically a great disservice to us, because people read today more than ever. It's just a fact. I have the numbers somewhere, but people consume an intense amount of literature. It doesn't always look like the genres that are 20th century genres, like modernist genres or pre-modern genres. And so I think it's our responsibility to study that literature, but that also means to go to places where we are, where the new genres, computer mediated genres, they're alien, and we are not always trained to read them. And I think this is where Yang Min's, so Yang Min said, I don't understand GPT-2, GPT-3. Yang Min, I don't, it's none of us really, it's a very complicated thing. It took me, a decade of research to just get kind of a handle approximately of how it works. But like I think Yang Min is like one of the most flexible minds I know. So even though he's very modest, he kind of gets it right away. But to understand that literary production, I think we need to envision literary studies. We need to envision classes that they don't replace what we do today, but they augment and they grow our field. And they grow our field in a way that comes back to the humanities tradition that is present in CS. So the move I want to make intellectually is not to reject that structuralism and computation and the erasure of difference or whatever. There's a particular way of putting it, but instead of rejecting it, I want to embrace it, but bring it back into the field of our expertise, of our collective expertise. And that's not easy. It requires other ways of reading. It requires other modes of training in our literature department. Because if we don't do that, so imagine the way people read today, the share of traditional fiction is growing smaller. So even though the pie is getting larger, people are reading more and more and more. They're reading less what is recognizable to us as literary scholars. So we are, I think, in perpetual danger of becoming sort of sidelined, but not because people read less, not because people care less about authorship or metaphor translation. It's because we reject the kind of metaphor and translation and authorship that is being practiced today. And I think pragmatically that, there is a way to sort of come back to have a more expansive field. So that's the pragmatic. And very quickly, I have a philosophical answer. I'm just going to, you'll know what I mean, Jeff, immediately. And that's, it's the Phaedrus, Plato's Phaedrus, where, Phaedrus is coming back from a lecture and he says, I heard this amazing lecture to Socrates, and he like recites it. And Socrates says, stop faking it. You have in your robe, you have a text. And actually, you're not remembering the lecture. You didn't understand anything about the lecture. You're just reciting it. And there's, goes back to the whole like critique of writing as something that will fundamentally kind of like ruin the natural capacity for memory and for creativity. And that skepticism, I think Heidegger sort of operates in that tradition, but no, so I would say, rather than seeing those two things as somehow separate, that technology, technology, computation, that's nothing that we do. I would say no, technology is present in creativity always. And it's not that computer science is doing something that like we cannot possibly understand, or even I think computation is not the right like computation. It's not math. Computer science, the roots of textual generation lie in linguistics. They lie in humanistic inquiry. They lie in theological inquiry, and it is sensitive to exceptions and difference and kind of all the stuff, Jeff, that you. But point is, there's a way of talking about it that just completely rejects it and pushes it out, that I think is pragmatically not expedient. So that's kind of, again, a sketch of a broader answer here. I'll stop there just so we can, yeah, I mean, we're in your service for MC.
Yeah, I think the job has a lot of the connotation, but actually at the moment we will continue to ask the Alex to ask question first, and then maybe later we wind up all the kind of discussion in a little bit different way too. So Alex Taekwang Lee,
Yeah.
Alex Taekwang Lee. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, very impressive talk, and I learned a lot from when you discussed, and then actually, Dennis, already you actually answered what I have in mind. So of course, yes, actually the technology, actually the rejection of technology impossible these days. And then I was very impressed, by your attempt to reconstruct, meaning of humanity based on the alternative, tradition of literary study, or some whatever called, and then so-called, the human science and the Kulturwissenschaft in German. And then, so I thought it very impressive, and then lots of attainment, related to that kind of topic. And then you actually touched on another, stream of that kind of tradition, and very impressive. And my idea also related to your, the discussion, and then your actually the response to Job is Plato's critique of letters. And then, actually lots of critical theory try to reveal that, for instance, in psychoanalysis, the revealing difference between the signifier and then, the letter, so-called the letter. And then I think letter might be some earliest, one of the earliest technology which try to preserve memory. In my opinion, since then, the human being, actually, we didn't have a different idea from the kind of earliest idea of, technology. That means technology is about, the recoding machine, by which we can try to retain our, data. So our ancestors, inscribed lots of letters on the stones, and then, they try to build in architecture. Everything is related to that kind of, recoding, data, using that kind of technology. But that's why I agree with the one you discussed. The technology today is not really different from what our ancestor was. The whole humanity tried to do. In this kind of history. But my idea is okay. I agree with what you have almost agree with the one you have discussed. But today also we had another problem. I think the bubble, the library bubble also related to this kind of philosophical question is that infinite monkey theorem. Is mathematically is the monkey, the typewriter. Monkey played played with the typewriter, and then he the monkey would, actually produce the whole text, like Shakespeare or whatever, the Hegel or Heidegger. That means that I think that is quite a basic idea of the total technology. What I mean, actually, these days, lots of, the scientific study, talk about the algorithm, and then algorithm already, presuppose such a total data. That means data is already produced. And just like, the Lacan, said in Florian letters, message is already arrived. And then what actually remained at the moment is definitely how can we represent, restore the whole data? Data is already there, like nature. And then we must interpret that one through technology. That is, in my opinion, the problem of scientific study, where some today's, the algorithm-oriented industry, something like that. Is but actually this algorithm or some sort of this one also they imitate kind of human behavior. What I mean, for instance, Gutenberg, the Gutenberg advertised his Bible, produced by his printing press, was almost the same as a book written by hand. That means actually book is actually the previous technology. And then this, the consequential technology is a new technology. That means it's a printing technology. Try to imitate or reproduce actually the previous, the frame of technology. It might be called in the form or whatever called is a sort of a grammar over some previous technology. And also today's Kindle as well. Actually, Dennis, actually you also put down in your book, Kindle try to advertise, try to disguise this machine look like the paper, real paper, something like that, And then this is, in my opinion, the algorithmic technology couldn't create new one. It would actually reiterate what we already experienced. That means actually, for instance, the actual sci-fi actually, the logic, you couldn't put, totally new one in the plot. You must actually create some kind of novum, which actually related to the previous, what I mean, actually, we already actually known. That means actually, the existing things. Today, we actually experience that one, and then this sci-fi, narrative must actually adapt. Of course, actually, they would try to modify this kind of, the things or some our experience, but it couldn't, create totally new one, which actually distinguished from our experience. I think actually the algorithm, problem algorithm, in my opinion, relies on this sort of affordance, with a technical term, the affordance. That means following, we have our habitual process, to accept, the kind of reality. Or in psychoanalytic term, might be we have such a habitual, customary, perception by which we create reality. I think that's why always actually this algorithmic and whatever they call it technology general must, the presupposed something, whatever called is brain in neuroscience or some consciousness, in the philosophy of consciousness, is it like David Chalmers in zombie, philosophical zombie, something like that? No consciousness, and then, but actually we need to actually presuppose that one, the kind of consciousness, whatever called is, the IMT, that means actually the infinite monkey also, presupposed and also, who can recognize that, text is a Shakespeare's one, or that text is a Heidegger's one. It's a monkey cannot, recognize which text belongs to actually which, also. So that's why actually I think, Dennis, you talk about, new humanity, if you like, new humanity, and it must actually embrace, as you said, the technology, but also, must discuss role of art. It is what Stigler said is new individuation of art, or some in Deleuze, Guattari sense, minor use of technology. It doesn't mean actually reject technology, but in my opinion, actually the artistic, exercise, as you quoted, the Virginia Woolf in your book, and then Virginia Woolf already actually, anticipated the kind of modern fiction. That is definitely, in my opinion, the algorithm, the automatic, writing, something like that. Is a very interesting, but the kind of writing as such already presuppose this sort of artistic moment. As I think there might be what the job called singularity and something like that. So what do you think about this? How can we actually, could you believe that we can educate this kind of singularity, or how can we embrace this artistic moment in your, methodology? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, that's a lot to think about, and again, very well put and well taken, well received comments. Let me just I just want to make sure, a quick kind of footnote is that I do not advocate for new humanities. It's just literary studies. I'm also trying to be modest and not have like these grandiose visions. So I often talk about literary studies and particular tradition within literary studies. And I think you said the word Wissenschaft. I don't know. I like German and Russian, for example, much better, where there's no distinction between humanities and sciences. It's just Wissenschaft. It's knowledge, systematic knowledge about whatever. Is it how it is in Korean? Does Korean have the word for humanities?
Yeah,
or is it more like German?
Inmunhak. We actually translated Inmunhak.
So it's like yeah. So I prefer Wissenschaft. So I prefer not to make this. You see, I'm trying to like connect the two traditions. So okay. As usual, pragmatic point, philosophical point. Pragmatic point is that the infinite monkeys are a problem. I'm not like a booster for technology. The fact that so much text is being produced is a problem for us. And there are many problems, but one of them is, I already mentioned, is spam. Is that we're being bombarded by this kind of like mindless, junky text. And then we have to spend energy, our mental energy, to go through it. And there's all sorts of psychological and I think social political implications from that. But but one tool to deal with infinite monkey writers is the infinite monkey readers, right? So and Google creates, so there is this constant sort of war of attrition between spam filters, who are, like I said, they're kind of like, you can think of them as this literary critics that are evaluating, but in a very simple way, is this good or bad? Do I send this through or do I reject, right? They have this gatekeeper function, and the stuff that goes through ends up in your inbox and the stuff, right? So, and again, I think we as people who read philosophy, literary theory, we should think about that process, and we should participate in the creation of spam filters, for example. And what worries me practically and politically is that, and this is, by the way, I'm taking a little bit from Kittler, who is also in the Heideggerian tradition of the fact that the algorithmic writers and the algorithmic readers at this huge scale, that's like social scale, world scale, is very corporate. And it's not necessarily, it's a system that doesn't necessarily invite you or me, or even like the University of Columbia to participate. So we are, and this is what kind of Kittler already anticipated in his book, Gramophone, typewriter. He anticipated, he said that there is going to be a moment where writing and reading happens on this corporate scale, and at a scale that's completely actually invisible to most people. And that is a worrisome development, and it's the kind of writing and reading, like I said, the kind of art, the kind of consciousness that is hugely intimate. That's why I gave the example of the physician encounter. This reaches deep into our lives, but that's a good example of an encounter where the textual production is completely hidden from you. And even if you said to your doctor, I would like to see that stories that are being written about me in the hospital, they cannot let you see the database. They can give you like a little report, but they won't. So we are excluded physically from participating in some of this activity that is, like I said, reaches deeply and intimately into our lives, into our bodies, and into our psyche. So that's one. The other thing that you said that I really liked is, you alluded to Chalmers, and there is a tradition in the philosophy of mind. So specifically Chalmers and Clark is another, and that's the tradition of the embodied cognition, embodied and embedded cognition. So one theory holds that thinking, consciousness, feelings happen in our mind. But there's another tradition that says it happens not just inside the brain, it happens in conversation with our environment, right? So I'm talking to you, but I'm also taking notes. There is a loop between the pen and the paper and my brain, the way I'm sitting, I'm sitting in a bouncy chair. So all of this is participating. So, is it me that's thinking, or is it the room that's thinking, right? There's a great paper, speaking of literature by Boeing and literature by planes. There is a great paper called How a Cockpit Remembers Its Speed. And I think it's by Clark, but the idea there is who lands the plane cognitively? Who lands the plane? And the traditional answer is the pilot. But if you diagram the decision-making process, there is a constant conversation between the pilot and tools, and between the pilot and the airport, between pilot and another pilot. So any complex task, and that includes art, and that includes literature, and that includes reading and writing, is not just solipsistic in our brain kind of activity, I believe, right? I would say that it's a social activity, and it's a technological activity. It's constantly mediated. And this doesn't have to be computers. Like I said, very often for me, you saw, I like the hand. And Geoff, there's a reason, the hand for Heidegger. There's a reason why I use the camera, right? Like I try to kind of break down, but the hand, the pen, technology is present. And you're present. The social, the community is always present in the act of cognition. And I think that's, that's how we can begin to expand the conversation into what does it mean to have social literature, to have technological literature, right? What does it mean today? What does it mean historically? It's always been like that, as you said. So anyway, lots more to say, but thank you so much for the very thoughtful comments.
Thank you so much for Dennis, your answer. Also the Alex Tekang Lee's, and then Joe Bradley's the questions. Actually, not question, but a kind of comment. Also, maybe the dialogue. There are hidden thoughts and hidden conversation. I think when Dennis provided the 3 texts, which is the Pressman's Digital Modernism Reading Machines and the Hitler's Introduction to Phone, Film, Typewriter, and then Tenon ebook. It's in there. If you follow the link, the 3 texts are there, and I read it closely. And amazing that you said more than you can say by providing the 3 links. So I ask you to read the 3 texts. And it's very valuable and contextualization, all the presentation today. And I think we better move on to the next panelist about Alex Hill. But after this, maybe we can return to the, I'm not sure how many minutes do we have, but still we have 50 minutes. In the meantime, we can continue. So I want to introduce this most difficult part for the chair to remember everything. I think next maybe Professor Kim Hee Jin and Professor Jamie Jungmin Yu will respond to Alex Gills. And the Professor Kim Hee Jin is assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at Gyeongbuk National University. He was a teaching faculty in Florida State University, and his research interests include Shakespeare, digital humanities, and early modern literature. Recently, he published the Visualizing Textual Similarity of Shakespearean Suspect Texts, an examination of the Henry VI plays, and the digital scholarship in the humanity, where the Alex Gill is the editorial board there, and also the memorial reconstruction theory and chronicles of the Henry is very much Shakespearean. And then also revision and duplication in early modern plays, re-evaluation of Minus hypothesis in the papers of Bibliographical Society of America forthcoming. And then Professor Jamie Jungmin Yu, who is the assistant professor at the College of Liberal Arts at the Yonsei University, Korea, She was formerly conducted her postdoctoral research at the Chinese Academy of Social Science in China, Beijing, China. She completed her dissertation, Materiality and Writing, Circulation of Text and Reading and Reception and Production of Literature in the 18th Century Korea at Harvard University in 2014. It was acknowledged as the 2015 Specialist Publication Accolade in the PhD Humanities by the International Convention of Asian Scholars, based in Leiden, in the Netherlands. She is a promising young scholar and very able and digital humanist. So let me start with the Professor Kim Hee-jin, and then Professor Jamie Jungmin Yu.
Hello. So thank you very much for the inspiring and illustrative lecture on two visionary models of the future library. I study early modern literature, as Professor Kim introduced, and utilize digital methodologies, mostly in my area of specialization. As an early modernist, I can but think of early English books online, EBO in brief, as a model library. For those who haven't heard of EBO, EBO is an online collection of early printed works in English, housing digital copies of almost 150,000 titles, printed from the very first printing in the 15th century to the end of the 17th century. The early modern studies have enormously benefited from this online library because it provides access to almost every printed book in the time period. The main strength of this library is its completeness as a collection of early printings. The centralized platform, or total library, as Professor Alex called it, the centralized platform gives early modernists ease of access. In addition, it makes it possible to say, not only we found something in the archive, but also we could find nothing in the archive. The negative result usually doesn't mean anything. One might be able to have a positive result later because it might lie somewhere outside the collection. But this is not the case in EBO because it's a sort of a bubble library or cathedral that was mentioned in the abstract. So I can quite confidently say the word, phrase, or whatever I'm searching for is not in the books printed in the early modern period. And such quite definitive negative confirmation is hugely advancing attribution studies. And in addition, on the basis of EBO, other platforms advance search algorithms. Early English Books Online Textual Creation Partnership, EBO TCP, to be short, provide transactions of EBO books, early print, powered by Northwestern University and Washington University in St. Louis, provide a better search engine thanks to its advanced algorithm. So we could say EBO, the Bible library for early modern studies, functions as a central platform and benefits many other digital projects or institutional libraries. However, the major downside of EBO is that it's a collection of printed books only, which means it leaves out anything not printed. Hundreds of years after the first printed books appeared, manuscript was still important. We have an autographed manuscript that might bear the hand of Shakespeare, and there are numerous important manuscripts. Surprisingly, the Shakespeare manuscript hasn't been digitized, and many other important manuscripts lie on the shelves of different libraries. For research I conducted a few years ago, I had to visit each of the library in the United Kingdom that houses manuscript I need to examine, and eventually I had to personally digitize them. The British Library provides a quite good catalog only for the manuscript it houses. Less funded libraries have less reliable catalogs without even saying digitization of the manuscript. Practically speaking, more consolidated efforts to catalog and digitize the manuscript will practically help many early modernists. The digital humanities are, of course, more than just digitizing manuscript. There's the Map of Early Modern London project that digitally locates historical places, some of which also appear in Shakespeare plays. As far as I know, Internet Shakespeare Edition is teamed up with the Map of Early Modern London project to better coordinate textual editing and mapping. So a professor and this collaborative project emphasized the importance of collaboration between different digital humanities projects and sharing their initiatives and visions. I know the Tower of Babel is a failure. It collapsed after all, and it is the symbol of a human arrogancy. But if we consider the reason for its failure, we could be a little bit more optimistic about the Babel model. In the story of Babel, workers from different countries failed to communicate and failed to collaborate. So my question is, I was wondering if we might be able to collaborate better, or the Babel-like library give us a more organized platform in which other platforms work individually without being merely subjective. So I was wondering if you, what do you think about the Babel model as opposed to Havana model? So is there any advantage or disadvantage in comparing to different models?
Thank you, Eugene. So there are a lot of benefits to trying to build a very large comprehensive collection. There are a lot of benefits also to trying to think of standards for sharing data or metadata that can be aggregated. This is the impulse, you can call it an ideology, behind important technologies in digital humanities like TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative, which dreams of a world in which we can share our edited literary texts in a way that different systems can read it. This is the dream of linked open data, which invites us to structure our data in a way that even if collections end up in different places, we can still take the data and aggregate it and investigate it in different ways. This is the impulse of gathering. You know, this is not necessarily bad, but you mentioned evil. Evil is a small collection compared to what we call today the monopolies of knowledge, the cartels of knowledge. So here's another way where we can understand what the total library of the world, the actual library of the world looks like today. Let me give you a little tour. There's like a few, in fact, I'm gonna need a map of the world for this. So I'm gonna share my screen really quick. And I'm gonna put up a map of the world that I myself made in order to do a project like about 7 years ago, where I was, we traveled around the world in 80 days, visiting one DH project at a time, every day. So I will use this this map. Ignore the content. I'm just going to use it so I can have a figure of the world. See, right around here in the North Atlantic world, there's about 5 or 6 monopolies that are making billions of dollars, building databases of knowledge, which they license to individual research libraries at universities. We know some of these names. We know, for example, Elsevier, that's probably the most famous one. There's another group called Cambridge Analytica. They own a company called EBSCO, which owns most of the theses, master's theses and doctoral theses. There's about 4 more. They make upwards of billions of dollars in profit a year, collecting all of our collective knowledge, ebooks, articles, etc. They are magnitudes larger than ECHO. And they form part of the reality of the actual library of the world. We travel here a little bit to Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and we find large pirate activity. So the pirate libraries of the world, which are curated and maintained by scholars and librarians, mostly in the humanities and philosophy, interestingly enough. Me and Dennis have had an opportunity to meet many of them throughout the years in a conference that we organized called the Architectures of Knowledge. They also have libraries that are magnitudes bigger than ECHO, and they provide access to the global South, South America, parts of Asia, and Africa that otherwise they wouldn't have, to the vast stores of knowledge. And in this particular sense, I'm talking about traditional knowledge produced by institutions, not the world of textuality, for example, that Dennis is opening up for us. I'm bracketing that for a second. I am talking about the bibliographic world, the one that has been named, the one that has been contained, not the world of databases of fragments, but the world of text with a name. Of course, in China, to your south, we have a vast collections that are contained within, not necessarily easy to access from outside, but that are way bigger than ECHO, right? Without going into further detail, I'll just close with Latin America producing some of the largest libraries of open access knowledge in the world, mostly because social policy in Latin America finances and drives a vast open access operation. Some of the databases there that you might want to take a look at are Cielo and Fedalik. They're in Spanish, but they're big and open to the world because of the leftist socialist traditions. This is just to give you a glimpse of how tiny ECHO is, but also of how impossible it is to actually really do the one that would hold them all. As a thought exercise, I would just, this is a Borges exercise that you can do later after the talk is over when you go home, is start building in your mind what the one library to rule them all would look like. What would it include? Start adding things to it. Start adding films, start adding books, start adding scientific papers, just continue adding things. And see, this is an exercise I do with my students, and see how far you get in trying to see what would fit into the one library to rule them all. And I make a reference here to a story we love a lot in the North Atlantic world, The Lord of the Rings. It's a story by J.R. Tolkien, where you've probably seen the movie, where there is one ring that would rule them all. Do this exercise, and then you will see how it fails. So yes, I understand the benefits and the drive that libraries have towards this, but it is ideology pure and simple because it is impossible materially. And ideology, Zizek, somebody mentioned Zizek, The Sublime Object of Ideology is a great book. I've always enjoyed it. But there's this element of ideology that is always this driven by desire, right? And it's a desire that is tied to your own failures in life, political or otherwise. It doesn't have to be individual. Libraries failed. Research libraries failed in the 1990s to coalesce and build a true alternative to Google Books, to WorldCat, and to all of these other things. They were scared. They did not have enough staff to produce an ecosystem that would not be controlled by corporate interest. Instead, they now have to be beholden to the corporate interest that controls all of this knowledge. And it is because of this failure in the past 3 decades that we still see this impulse today, like maybe now we will be able to construct the library. Too late, lost. The only hope is in the pirates. So I leave you with that. Maybe this is controversial to hear for libraries, but I'm not a librarian anymore, so I can speak the truth.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope that we can have more time to have a kind of deep conversation while in-person kind of conference. Maybe next year we might have some kind of the in-person conference. I hope. So the Professor Jamie, the U,
Yes. Hi, Alex, Dennis. Hi, I'm Jamie. So thank you for sharing your beautiful presentations. I really enjoyed a lot your presentation and also for all this symposium because it gave me a it's really helped me raise many questions, fundamental questions about digital humanities. What is digital humanities? The meaning and definition of digital humanities. I really enjoy the open syllabus, the website, and I'm wondering whether we can draw this diagram of network for the digital humanities related syllabi. Because I'm wondering how people and instructors include or construct their syllabi when they design their courses about digital humanities. So my impression is that in Korea these days, people, when you talk about digital humanities, would mean either artificial intelligence or big data, or sometimes ontology, which means the visualizing or representing the basic structure of the primary text. So, and also these days, the government has started this new initiative for the digital humanities, so which worries me a lot. And also they encourage me to employ the digital initiative, the model to many humanities, including the literature. So my question is, first, my question is how, but as you, the Alex, introduced runaway slaves, I think that all the time the reason we can get all the complete information, or is that because the politics play behind that? It's not just the information was broken or library is broken, so sometimes the information is intentionally manipulated for some reason. So library or Bible, I left my note on my chat box. The library Bible sounds too perfect or sometimes importance, and the perfectness of the big data could function as an ideology. So yes. So I'm wondering digital humanities or big data. And the second thing is that it's related to big data humanities. So it's also related to the history of Bible. So when you talk of the big data in the humanities, so I'm wondering what does the big data means here? Because when we do the humanities research, we define the boundaries of our research, boundaries of our data set, and then set up the hypothesis and test the hypothesis and draw a new conclusion. So for the big data, we always have to select some portion of data and curate it, and otherwise we can start our study. So I'm wondering, how, if the library or Bible can exist, or is it just imaginary or just hypothetical? So the second question is that I also type here in our chat box is that when you talk about sociology of literature, like Robert Dunton said, we imagine the circulation of a communication circuit, how the authors have a conversation with the outside of the literary production. So for the machine literature, so what kind of agencies can you imagine? Because I remember that Danny said we don't know how the algorithm produce the literature. We are excluded from the production, the process. So I'm wondering about what kind of agencies can you imagine when you talk about the machine literature? I have two questions. Yeah.
Maybe, can I begin answering them in a way that opens up the discussion to other people as well? And the first thing, so DH, you can see that in our work, we often use the word DH, me and Alex, but often we don't, because it's a really big umbrella term for basically various changes in our field brought about working with computers, right? And so there is an administrative push to revitalize or expand or whatever you want to change the way we do things from an administrative side, that and often that involves funding and money and new positions. And I would say, of course, it's very important, and I hope you agree, Jamie, that we drive the conversation. So there's the administrative pressure, but there's our intellectual pressure to say, okay, yes, we should expand our field on our terms, and these are the terms. And I think reclaiming some of that heritage, the intellectual heritage of digital, and to say, no, digital does not only belong in computer science. Digital has to do with language. Digital has to do with art, with theology. And that goes to the second point. And again, it's just like is that for scholars who do, and Alex said this very well, for scholars who are textual scholars, for somebody who studies for a theologian or a scholar of the Bible in the 19th century, counting words in the Bible and bringing compendium, making compendia out of biblical texts, that's not a foreign computational technique. It's one of the key philological techniques that's been practiced, well, since the Bible. It's part of Kabbalistic traditions. It's part of theological traditions. So point is that there is a way to be inclusive in terms of the various ways in which we practice scholarship. So, there's one thing that we do in literary studies, which is read and interpret, hermeneutics. That's very important. But there are other kind of strains, textual scholarship, materiality of the text, the sociality of the text, that are present, but maybe they're not in the center of the way the field is practiced today. And I think they offer many opportunities to expand and to kind of respond to the changing technological conditions that kind of culture and our administration is asking us. Can you respond? Like, what do you think of of the fact that GPT-3 is writing poetry or finishing your books? What does it mean? I have a question for everybody. Your students, this stuff that I showed you, when I wrote it 2 years ago, I had to run some code. Today, you can go to a website and click a button and it will produce a paper. So if you're assigning papers to your students, I guarantee you your students will be submitting papers written by GPT-3. And as you see, they're kind of interesting. So here's my question. We are all going to be assigning papers. We think a paper is like a good marker for how somebody is creative, how they understand their material. Okay, well, people today write in conversation with computers. How are we going to? And I think culture, society, administration is coming to us and saying the conditions of writing and reading and interpreting have changed. Please respond. And I think it's kind of our duty to respond, and it provides many opportunities to do it on our terms and kind of with our tools and with our history. So maybe, Young Min, we're again at your service for, maybe open up.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy your talk very much. I think this time maybe we open up the question to the floor. At the same time, maybe I might have a question, both of you, briefly. I don't want to spend the rest of time for answering this question and answer, but we have 22 minutes. My question is, I'm intrigued by the idea of the both of your talk very much deeply, and certainly I have the definition of meaning of the feedback loop ecosystem, the environment, not only the library or AI or algorithmic thinking, way of thinking, body and soul, everything. I mean, is involved, because my topic is kind of very much like the convergence, but consilience as well. So my question is what is the nature of this feedback loops in the ecosystem, the digital materials, digital environment, digital platform, whatever. So I think this feedback loop, we are feeding back, I mean, to each other, which is very important in a very constructive way, not destructive way. But I'm actually this constructive way of the what I was very interested in how Dennis has been articulating all this kind of the business of constructive feedback loops in the low circuit and higher circuit, both at the same time, low and high at the same time, and then deep and kind of close reading, hyper attention. Everything is related to this kind of the algorithmic thinking. So I'm intrigued by the idea of the your broad at the same time very singular understanding of each individual materiality of the digital texts and sound and the images and language itself. So there are a lot of thinking going on. But what do you? How do you respond? There's no direct answer, but we can talk maybe another topic for next conference or something like that. So can you say something more about it briefly, and then we can continue to open the question to other people.
I mean, Young-min, as you're saying, it's a topic for a whole conference and a whole, perhaps collected volume. But I think, I tend to be very visual in my thinking. So when I think about, loops are, I think, a very important part in, computer science and in I think psychology as well, in psychology of perception. And so I begin by drawing. So when I think of contemporary literary ecosystem, I begin by drawing diagrams, and those diagrams, have moments of kind of self-reflection, and those are incredibly key moments. But it's such a complex picture that I think, it's something that we should take on. I think you're right, in a larger conference.
Alex, would you like to respond or pass?
You lost the mic, Alex.
All right, good. Sorry, my AirPods died, so I just had to switch to the system microphone. But there was another question in the chat also, I think from Maxime, who was also inspired to think a lot about this idea that the results of the GP2 then is prompted your own thinking, and then so there was this feedback loop. My only comment about this is to reemphasize something I already put in the comment earlier, which is that to me, I do not subscribe either to the idea that that cognition happens in the brain, or that cognition is this relationship between the brain and the environment. Or maybe a little bit towards the second, but I'm mostly interested in just the environment. I believe that you guys think, I think it's true that you guys think, but I have absolutely no evidence of it other than the media that we construct here with our voices, or the one that is being recorded right now on paper. I don't know what is happening in your mind. No clue. The only thing that I see is what is material. And this is part of my thinking about the archive and the library of the world, is thinking around how there is a socio-technical construct that takes the shape of a feedback loop. So another way of calling algorithmic thinking that we can explore is call it reactive thinking, input-output, where it's like Dennis reads the GP3, it actually leads to a reaction from him for more output, more text. There's an autopoietic process here where text leads to more text. It's autopoiesis. It's a word used in biology to describe reproduction and cell mechanisms where the same becomes the same. I find similar processes here at play. And this is why it's important to pay attention to the larger world of textuality that Dennis is paying attention to, because it will actually impact our lives. So we cannot exist outside of the archive. We ourselves are part of the same construct. So this is why it's important to actually, what I am completely convinced by Dennis's call for us to engage ourselves in the study of these things and understanding these mechanisms as mechanisms, because they do impact our lives. Because it is in that world of the record where we live our lives, regardless of what you think. Like I said, I have no clue what it is that you're thinking.
Yeah. Thank you. I think there is the hand, the Professor Yumi-san, who originally planned to participate here, but she had some other kind of commitment, so she couldn't go. But Professor Yumi-san, would you like to, yeah.
Oh, yes, I thank you. Do you hear me? Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your inspiring talks. And I'm leading a project, actually, the fiction generation with AI. So I absolutely agree with Dennis that we can review the history of literature or that of literary studies by paying more attention to the traces of influence of literary imagination on today's algorithmic culture of writing. And actually, my question is seems to be rather a minute one, or more sort of a pragmatic one. You mentioned Tailspin when you talked about the Boeing's, these writing programs as a sort of precursor to today's GPT-3. And you mentioned Vladimir Prop and the systematic understanding of narrative as a sort of a precursor to today's algorithmic writing. But actually, there is a big technological break between the rule-based narrative generation tradition and then today's GPT-3 style approach. It's sort of, the GPT-3 is more like an automatic writing without any rules, and then this is more like the type of writing mentioned by the Kittler, which whom you mentioned. So actually, I was wondering, how do you articulate the difference between today's AI writing and the one that we actually had as precursors to these culture in general? So I think if we have to look into if we have to establish a history, then probably we'd better find another line of writing practice that sort of inspires today's GPT-3 type of generation model rather than Vladimir Prop. So how do you articulate this?
Yeah, no, listen, that's a beautiful question. And, I'm writing a book, the literary theory for robots, that a huge part of that book is talking about the difference between statistically Markov chain-based generation that we have now and the rule-based, as you say. So it's a complex topic. I don't want to lose people too much, but let me just give you like a little, is that Markov was also like a 19th century, actually, Russian mathematician. And he wrote a little bit in the 20th century. And his most influential paper introduced this idea that I think is the direct precursor to GPT-3. And the idea is that if I say, I would like to eat a, and then space, right? So you have a string of words. I would like to eat a. So if you say sandwich, that's a probable word. But if we say like, I would like to eat a moon, like that's not very probable, right? That's more unusual. So Markov had this thing where you can continue statistically, you can suggest a particular, something like that. But here's and this is the paper. It's a key computer science paper. And then I read it. Because computer science is so ahistorical, they almost never read the original paper. They read like, today's whatever, whoever writes a Markov chain. The original Markov chain paper was about Pushkin, the Russian poet. The original Markov chain paper was a philological paper studying Pushkin and then generating Pushkin-like prose based on this idea. So yes, you're very correct that within this alternative history of literary scholarship, there are also multiple sub-branches, and they are complex, intertwined. But again, to me, it just blew my mind that even this most statistical computational field that leads to GPT-3 has its roots in the analysis of poetry through the work of Markov.
Thank you so much. Great. Yeah. I think we have two more hand. I think starting with Professor Kim, Hee-jin Kim, and then Jung Hyun Hwang. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So for here's a quick question for Professor Tannen. I'm also team member for the project that let the AI generate fiction, and I found many limitations on GPT-3. So I don't think GPT-3 does understand the basic rules of fiction writing. So, for example, it doesn't have any characters, and it cannot connect sentences in meaningful ways. So you called it's narrative engineer, but it's not necessarily narrative. It just generate sentences, not necessarily narrative. And I was very interested in the structuralist approach, the formalist approach, because it just analyzed the basic elements of fiction writing. So I was wondering, what would the benefit if we pay more attention to formalist or structuralist approach, not necessarily post-structuralist?
Yeah, I think thank you again, such a wonderful and beautiful question, and it relates to what Yumi-sun was saying. Context, so GPT-3 in particular is not very good at keeping context across a long period, like a story, but here's the thing to realize, that there is, so story generation has a long and deep history. There is a conference. GPT-3 is one among thousands of academic papers that come out every year, every month. It's a deep field. So, and I go there and I'm lost, but I always go there and I'm like, I should come here more often to this part of the academic world, because your comment would be very much well received there. The problem of context, what is it called? Persistence. So you have a character that actually persists, and GPT-3 is not good at it. And there is a bunch of ideas and a bunch of experiments that address that. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I would say. It's, again, we are dipping our toe into a giant ocean of research that has long left our field. So that's a difficult thing. But I'm very much encouraged by your work and by Yumi-sun that you are going down this direction. Let's go together. Please get in touch with Alex and myself. Like, we love this. There's so much to do. There's so much to catch up on, and there's so much new work to be done together. So let's do it.
Thank you.
And Professor Hwang Jung-yeon?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. Those lectures are fascinating, and most of all, you two gave us different thoughts and about digital humanities and everything. First of all, to Dr. So I was listening to your lecture, and then in the very first part of your lecture, I was totally agree to your idea that there are two different types of libraries in this world. One is material and physical, and the other is, as you said, even if we do not see the physicality or physical buildings or that materiality, but there are so many informations that we can call that these informations were arranged in their own way. Something we can call library. But I thought that, and at the second part of your lecture, I thought I came up to this idea, like, then why do we have to call that all these libraries? In that sense, according to your logic or theory, then, for example, we can call YouTube, in a sense, library, Facebook library, Wikipedia library, right? it is like we are all humans, but each of us has our own unique name, right? So we don't really necessarily call all of them library. They already have their own website name. So I think, well, if you want to call them or categorize them under this name, then are we giving the violence of naming? We always, with human desire, we have very strong desire to categorize. Oh, this is library. So, well, is it a library or not? Then authority can be a strong criteria, as you said. But in that logic, I feel that there's a strong human desire naming something. And then I want to, because like, as I said, YouTube has its own name and Facebook has its own name and Wikipedia has its own name. We don't really necessarily call them a library. That can also be a violence. And to Dr. Tenen, so GTP3 or that reading, and well, alternative text reading, there exists alternative text in this world. Then you gave me a different recognition. But when you show us 2 paragraphs, and I felt that you also have that kind of structuralist idea. Then when GTP paragraph has kind of narrativity, then finally it is accepted or embraced to the boundary of text. So there are 2 types of text for you. Then one has narrativity, and the other non-narrative, anti-narrativity. So there are many types of text, but the machine reading finally get to the level of its nature. The machine can have a narrative. Then it is accepted by text. So, then that kind of binarism also functioned in your discourse or the diagram you showed us, or the whole discourse can be included in the discourse of the structuralism. Then those subtext or alternative text, or your understanding of distinguishing those 2 types of text is already structuralist type of thinking. Then do you think then you need to revise your diagram? Or it is because I thought that there are 2 big circles, while I was listening to your lecture. Is it a text which has narrative, or the text which has not narrative after all?
Thank you for those wonderful questions. I think in my answer to your question, that might be the beginning of Dennis's answer to his. They rhyme very well, both questions. First of all, I don't think it's possible to escape what you're calling the violence of naming. So I stop worrying about it, because I'm less interested in actually saying Facebook and YouTube are libraries because I really care about the word library. No, I'm interested in us understanding a reality and understanding reality, like what is going on, what are these things. So I have to use metaphors. So in order to describe the sort of collection of documents that happens on YouTube, because it is a collection of documents, and the collection of documents on Facebook and data, also not just named documents, but data in its fragmentary nature, I use the metaphor of the library, but it is nothing but a metaphor. The reality is something else. In order for me to communicate this idea, let me go back to the Havana that I was talking about earlier, the Havana of the special period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And people in that city and in the whole country of Cuba had to look around themselves to find out, to understand better the material reality of what surrounded them, because they needed to find ways to survive without many resources. So I'll give you an example of the washing machine and dryer machine that the Soviets had provided Cuba with during the 80s. Turns out the washer was really great. And they came in stack. The drying machine was on top and the washing machine was on the bottom. The washing machine was great, but the dryer machine was very bad. They were all getting broken. So Cuban people, they started sawing off the drying machine and taking it apart to use the parts for other things. One of them was, for example, to make a fan out of the fan that was used in the dryer machine. Something else the Cubans did around this time, because they didn't have antennas for television, was, nobody knows who did it first. They noticed that the aluminum trays that they were served in the comedores, where the socialist country ate together during the 90s, were made of metal. So they took them and somebody put it on top of the house. And then like in 2 weeks, everybody in Cuba had aluminum trays in the roof of the house that were being used as antennas. These are two examples of how people look at beyond the naming, the sort of single use that you're told a dryer must be used for this, a tray must be used for this. They looked beyond that naming, that violence of naming, to look at the material reality and see how they can use it, right? Well, this is the same thing I'm asking us to do. I am asking us to look beyond the violence of naming, the metaphors, in order to understand the reality. So how is a digital library done in the National Library of South Korea different than YouTube? How is it? Or is it the same? What are the parts? What is that material reality? When we try to understand what is happening right now in the world of textual production, knowledge, collection, etc., I am asking all of us to look beyond the names, the metaphors that are failing us, so that we can see what is going on. Perhaps from there, we can get better insights about where we want to go in the future. Dennis.
I think and thank you. Yeah, I think that was another great question, is that what unites my approach and Alex, and the way he described it, our approach is descriptive rather than prescriptive. So yeah, I'm not interested in like maintaining boundaries between literature, non-literature, library, not library. You know, specifically about library. I went to my local library here in the Bronx in New York City, and there are many books in the library, but it's also clear that the contemporary library that says library in it has many other functions. So for example, it provides services for the homeless in New York. So there are many people who don't have access to the internet who are there. It provides a bathroom. It provides a space for children where they play and they have activities. So point is, that's also a library. And the opposite is, when YouTube, so it's a complicated thing, but library is a complex space, and it changes through time. So whatever people, I'm kind of very ecumenical like that. So that's to Alex's I think we're very much aligned there. The second thing is, I do want to say, just like on a personal level, is that I don't like binaries. So I hope that's not the impression you're left with. I don't think that, computers attain, how did you put it? Computers attain literature when they have narrativity. No, that's not, that was one of my example, but remember the other example is the hospital. There is there is a view onto a hospital that can be, where the hospital can be viewed as a literary textual system. And some of those parts are narrative, like for example, patient stories. And others are not narrative. Others are translation, for example, is the huge. The point is, there's many other sort of attributes of a textual literary system that are not narrative. So I agree with you. If that's your critique, I very much agree with you on that level. And the only binary thing, that I do, I was just saying that there is a tradition in literary studies where we place structuralism and formalism, and that formalism and structuralism as a specific intellectual kind of thing that we know about has another life in computer science. Do you know what I mean? And it probably has another life in anthropology, another life in linguistics. I mean, so again, I'm with you to argue against binaries or to police some kind of boundaries, and I'm with Alex also to say, I'm interested in description. What is literature is changing? What is the library is changing? My job is just to describe it and to pay attention and to just, write thick descriptions.
Okay.
And it's so difficult. It's so difficult to, like, we struggle even to describe the present reality. We don't have the language yet. We don't have the discourse. It is like, this is effort to just do that. Forget interpretation and hermeneutics, or like just describing. It's really difficult right now.
Great. I hope that we can have more time. I think there are 3 hours is not enough. I plan to have some 4 hours, but I mean it's too much, like the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So I think at the moment we are at the final stage. I think we better ask the plenary speakers briefly about you just mention anything you like, and then finally the keynote speakers will talk. Maybe 1 minute for one person, and then finally maybe I'll do something. So thank you so much for this. But I mean, Job, would you like to start with maybe 1 minute winding up remarks?
Well, I wanted. I'm not going to say anything, but I had the privilege to go to Chennai University, to Madras University, a few years ago with Tai Kwang Lee as well. And we had a tour of the library, and we went down into the basement, and there was a blackout, so we had some time to just be there. And then we were looking through the books, and some of the books were from the late 19th century, and nobody had actually read them for decades. It looked like they were full of dust, and the pages were stuck together and things like that. So I think, yeah, we are in a moment now where digitization of the history of English language, for example, is having a real change in how we are studying. So I think, yeah, I agree that we don't have the language yet to explain this revolution that we're living through. So on that anecdotal note, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and the Alex Taekwang Lee, would you like to say the final remarks?
Your final remarks. So, all right, just I think this is kind of continuous project, as you said, and then also I totally agree with that. We don't have any language yet, to define or describe, if you prefer, what's happening at the moment. But actually, I a little bit want to go back to the 1947, Norbert Wiener talk about the cybernetics, and then I think actually there are lots of actually philosophy and the theory since then they try to respond to this kind of new mode of actually technology. I think we are now actually the witness that kind of apex or some culmination of that kind of cybernetics, and then I think that I want to praise your work and then your project. And then I hope actually, watching what's come up, later together. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bruce Hee-jin Kim.
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating and inspiring talks. And I really thanks Professor Gill and Tannen. And I work with Professor Yoon for the AI writing project. So yeah, I will definitely read some early formalist writings and their findings, and I will try to adopt some directions provided by Professor Tannen and Alex Gill. Thank you very much.
Great. Professor Jamie Jungmin Yu.
Well, yes, first of all, thank you for sharing the syllabus, Professor Gill. So I actually clicked all the programs here, and so I'm also trying to figure out how you define the digital humanities here. So yes, so it's very informative. So rather than these days in Korea, so yeah, pretty much put some emphasis on AI, artificial intelligence. It's more like analysis of language and literature stuff, and I realized that you teach lots of simple programs to the students, so it was very great model for me. So when I conduct my class, so I'm really grateful for that. And also, for my own research, I'm doing the actually Chinese text and written in pre-modern Korea. So I'm always interested in how I employ this kind of program to my own research written in classical Chinese and poetry, as how to define and analyze intertextuality between the poetry and its representation. So definitely think I will try this programs here, and thank you very much for sharing. And then yep. And also, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful symposium. So I learned a lot.
I want to recognize some people who are belonging to the Academy of Korean Studies. People like the Professor Kim Ba-ro is the kind of platform manager today. He did everything, kind of the YouTube and also the Zoom. He's expert. He's AI specialist as well. He didn't speak today, but I mean, he just want to be observer. And also Ji-Hae-in, Jeon-Ga-rim, Hyun-Hye, they are from the Academy of the Korean Studies. And then Dagung University, Choi Young-bong, Jung-Eun-ja, 박성만, 조현국, 심상길, 주미란, they are belonging to Dagung University, the co-PI of the president of the Kim Ju-sung, he's co-PI. And also we have the Lee Seok-kwang, who's from the Gyeongsang University, and he just wrote down something. So everybody together today, very intense. I hope that maybe next year I might offer a kind of conference so that we can have more audience, the bigger audience, but this time, and we have the Zoom fatigue. Not all the people want to attend this Zoom symposium. So maybe I'm looking for. So finally, I would like to ask the plenary speaker, the keynote speakers, Alex and Dennis, for the future kind of plans for us. I'm going to invite you anyway. So would you like to say something about your impression about today's conference? I mean, Dennis, would you like to say first?
Sure. I mean, I think we've said so much already. I just want to again repeat how thankful I am to be here and how honored I am to engage in a conversation with your community. And this has been also, I took so many notes. I really look forward to many more. I hope this is just the beginning of us working together and thinking together and writing and researching together. So again, thank you to everybody who made it possible.
Okay, thank you. And Alex?
I mean, the same as what Dennis said. He took the words right out of my mouth. So honored to be here with you in this conversation. Every time I get together with Dennis, I also, leave inspired too. So it's always a pleasure to be again with Dennis in the same room. And with your questions, we had a great conversation, and
amazing.
I thank you for that. Really, really good. I hope that we can get together next year, hopefully in person, so that we can continue the conversation all day. We start in the morning, and go all day. So thank you all, and we are both very easy to reach. You can find us, and let us know how you want to keep this conversation going by email or Twitter or whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And also I want to mention that there are two people, the Maxim Philip and Alison Steinmeier, who has been here all the time. So thank you so much for your participation, and Marisa Partham as well. And also two of our co-hosts, Sujin Jo and then Son-young, they are my PhD student. So I think they are very supportive. So thank you so much for the co-hosting, and also everybody who are present here. And I'm looking forward to next year. I hope that the Alex Gill and Dennis Tenen will be my collaborator with future kind of the project. I'll write to you, and thank you so much for your intriguing and provocative question and also supportive and collaborative, very friendly. The most friendly digital humanist in the world to me. And the most friendly people like Joe Bradley and Alex Gill. And Alex Tekangli, he just left. So thank you so much for this, and I'm looking forward to the future development. Okay, thank you, and stay safe and healthy, and see you next. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye everybody. Bye bye Youngmin.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
네, thank you.
감사합니다.
안녕하세요.
수고하셨습니다. Yeah, great,
감사합니다.
great.
고맙습니다,
예,
교수님.
예, 수고하셨습니다. 아이고, 오늘 고생하셨습니다. 김바로 선생님이 제일 고생하셨는데, 성공리에